What if what we call public opinion was just a manufactured narrative that makes it easier to convince people that if their views are different, then there's something wrong with that, or there's something wrong with them?
Spending is a tax. As soon as the government spends money, eventually it's a tax. Sometimes we put a direct tax on the people, sometimes we borrow the money, and sometimes we print the money.
Freedom and the dignity of the individual have been more available and assured here than in any other place on earth.
The Patrick Riggins Show. And now your host, Patrick Riggins.
All right. Deal with the devil. A little pop evil there. To start off the show, we try to play a different song every week to lead into the show. And I think this one hits the mark on what we talk about a lot on here. Government. It's sort of a deal with the devil. You have to always keep your eye on it, and to be honest, we'd be better off with as little as we can get away with. But before I get off on a tangent, let me welcome you to the Patrick Riggins Show. Thank you for tuning in again this week. For you new listeners, what you're going to hear this next hour, you'll probably not hear anywhere else. Not on television, nor radio, not even satellite radio. This show is the crown jewel of the Libertarian Lighthouse Radio Network, on which you will hear the best elucidation of the original true American values of freedom and liberty. Pure, clean, clear, and unspoiled. That's what you get when you drink from the headwaters of the river of freedom and liberty. Oh, and before I forget, we're here on our charter radio station, News Talk 98.7 WOKI in Knoxville, Tennessee. You're listening to the voice of freedom and liberty that the government and its apostles have told you not to listen to. Don't pay any attention to that man speaking of freedom and liberty. You don't want any of that. Look, you're free. You have liberty. All you have to do is claim it. And all you need to do that is vote in people who will take it back from the government. That's it. But we have to get these people to run for office, and then more importantly, get them voted in. Getting back to my original thought for a moment, that of being government is kind of a deal with the devil. Unfortunately, we had to form some sort of body to deal with everyone from outside this country, and that's the federal government. That's what we did. But if you think about it, we really don't need it for anything else. I've pointed out on this show before, there isn't anything in this country that isn't also located within a state. So why do we need the federal government dealing with anything inside the country? The states can handle whatever is within their borders quite nicely. Whenever I make this argument, I get people screaming, "But Patrick, what about slavery? Some states had slavery and others didn't. Do you really want to go back to that?" Now, these people are the ones who are sleeping in history class. Or they weren't taught the truth in the first place. Slavery existed because the federal government enabled it. It's written into our Constitution. And the Constitution created the federal government. The very document creating this Leviathan we're dealing with today contained within it laws concerning slavery. One of which is Article 4, Section 2, and I've got it right here. No person held to service or labor in one state, under the laws thereof, escaping into another, shall, in consequence of any law or regulation therein, be discharged from such service or labor, but shall be delivered up on claim of the party to whom such service and labor may be due. Now, this was undone by amendment, but it was still in the original document. And what it means is if you were a slave and escaped to another state, you shall be turned over to your owner if they come a-calling. So no, states' rights isn't about going back to slavery. In fact, many states chose to nullify federal laws and rulings regarding slaves. They ignored federal legislation validating slave laws. It's the same thing some states are doing now concerning Obamacare. They're voting to nullify federal laws within their state. They're also doing it concerning the legalization of marijuana and some federal gun laws. And you say, Patrick, what if the state in which I'm living is doing something I don't agree with? What then? I shouldn't have to move to a state that is. Well, if we're living according to freedom and liberty, then the state won't be doing something like that. The government won't have any say-so in how you live your life. As long as you aren't infringing on someone else's rights, well, you can do whatever you want. I've said it before. Sums it up very nicely. Mind your own business and keep your hands to yourself. Speaking of government, I want to address something I've been hearing lately now that Obamacare is being activated. All of these people are complaining about how can it be right for the government to require us to buy medical insurance? I can't afford it, and I can't afford the fine either. Where has all this complaining been while we've been forced to be buying mandatory retirement insurance? You've been forced to purchase Social Security for almost 100 years now. The government is not really doing anything now. It hasn't been doing since the last century. You may not want to participate. You may think you can save your money better than the government can, but you aren't given that option. If you work, you get that money taken out before you even get paid. The first person in line for your paycheck is the United States government. And in a lot of states, that's the second person in line, is your state government. And in a lot of localities, it's your local government. So after the government gets through with your paycheck, then you're allowed to keep whatever they decide you can keep. And isn't that nice of them? Isn't it nice how government gets to force you to pay it for services you may not need or even want? I mentioned it last week. It's like going to the store and having to buy beets. I don't like beets. I don't want beets. Well, too bad you have to buy beets. You aren't given any choice in the matter. I have something else while we're on Obamacare. We had a story come up this week. The Republicans have announced that while they don't want to see Obamacare implemented, hey, they do like parts of it and would like to incorporate them into their own plan. Now, Michael Gerson, he's a former speech writer for President George W. Bush. On Friday, he wrote, urging Republicans to start thinking along these lines of what kind of health care policy they could create as opposed to simply how they'd tear down the existing one. He wrote, in a theoretical post-Obamacare period, a Republican plan should offer a universal credit to anyone who's not covered by a large employer. It should also include protections for those without insurance from, quote, catastrophic expenses. Now, this is from a Republican, someone from the party that states they're for limited government. For you regular listeners to this show, this comes as no surprise. I was telling you this last year when Romney was cooking up the same thing. Here's two of his quotes.
I say we're going to replace Obamacare, and I'm replacing it with my own plan. I'm not getting rid of all of health care reform. Of course, there are a number of things that I like in health care reform that I'm going to put in place.
Everyone was asking, why did the Republicans cave on the shutdown? It's because they're all part of this government religion, this devotion to all things government. They love to meddle. They love to fiddle around with things in the country. They have the right idea. They have all the answers. They are the ones who have to take care of everyone else. You can't do it. You simply aren't able. You're too stupid to figure out how to take care of yourself. Never mind, your ancestors did it since the beginning of time. I don't think they realized that when Europeans started coming to this country, there wasn't any welfare. There weren't any housing subsidies. Yet somehow people still survived and even prospered. Now, all of a sudden, over the last 100 years or so, government thinks Americans have become idiots and unable to care for themselves or others. Now, I've said this over and over. This isn't about Democrats versus Republicans. It's about government versus the people. I don't care which side of the aisle they sit on. All of these people sitting in Congress think they can do it better than you can. And there really isn't anything wrong with that. It's just when they get around to trying to prove it to us. All right, we're up on the first break of this seemingly short hour on the Patrick Regan Show. When we return, we'll have some more NSA spying news, and we'll talk about morality and government and some other stuff before we run out of time this week. When we come back, do we have our music coming up, Jay? I think he's scrammed. There it goes. I either caught him napping or he's watching a football game. One of those two. When we come back up here on the Patrick Regan Show, here on the Libertarian Lighthouse Radio Network. We'll be back. Join us after this break. Welcome back. What an appropriate song to lead into the second segment of the show today. Rockwell's Somebody's Watching Me. Welcome back to the Patrick Regan Show here on the Libertarian Lighthouse Radio Network and locally on News Talk 98.7 WOKI. Leaning over and turning the headphones up a little bit. In case you haven't heard, and this has been running on some of the news breaks during the day, today is the day there is a march in Washington protesting all of the spying that's been occurring in our country and outside our country. I wanted to mention this real quick. I don't have any audio from it since it's going on right now, but if you want to read about what's happening, you can go to their website. The website is stopwatching.us. That's stopwatching.us, not .com, but .us. So you can head over there after the show, and it's a protest, like I said, up in Washington, and they're talking about trying to roll back this massive NSA spying that's been going on. And it's a lot of groups from both sides of the ideological spectrum doing this. So it's nice to see everyone coming together and fighting against this. Now, speaking of spying, did you read this week where the Germans are getting a little tired of the games we've been playing over at the NSA? I've got the story right here from the UK Guardian. The National Security Agency monitored the phone conversations of 35 world leaders after being given the numbers by an official in another U.S. government department. And this is according to a classified document provided by our favorite buddy, whistleblower Edward Snowden. The confidential memo reveals that the NSA encourages senior officials in its, quote, customer departments, such as the White House and the Department of State and the Pentagon. It encourages them to share their Rolodexes so the agency can add the phone numbers of leading foreign politicians to their surveillance systems. The document notes that one unnamed U.S. official handed over 200 numbers, including those of 35 world leaders, none of whom are named in the memo. They were immediately, quote, tasked, which I guess that means put up to the front of the line, for monitoring by the NSA. You see, not even world leaders are safe from this massive spy operation. Arriving in Brussels for an EU summit, German Chancellor Angela Merkel accused the U.S. of a breach of trust. She said, quote, "We need to have trust in our allies and partners, and this must now be established once again. I repeat that spying among friends is not at all acceptable against anyone, and that goes for every citizen in Germany." The NSA memo obtained by The Guardian suggests that such surveillance was not isolated, as the agency routinely monitors the phone numbers of world leaders and even asks for the assistance of other U.S. officials to do so. So the German chancellor is stating that, quote, "spying among friends is not at all acceptable against anyone, and that goes for every citizen in Germany." But when all this NSA spying first came out, she didn't really press for any more information because it only involved German citizens, but not her. But now that it turns out her phone was being monitored as well, now she's mad about it. All this demonstrates is that these people are in power, or these people in power, They're the same the world over. It isn't just an American problem. It's a worldwide problem with power-mad people running these countries. This is what Edward Snowden meant when he stated that this NSA spying was destabilizing the world. All of these countries have had this cozy little relationship with the United States. They've been spying on their people, and we've been spying on their people and us. But no one was really concerned until we find out, hey, the NSA is also spying on those leaders as well. Now all of a sudden it's a problem. All over the world we see this happening. Governments are screwing over their people, and it's okay. But when these people in power get a taste of their own medicine, now they don't like it very much at all. But getting back to the story, it says, in one recent case, the recently released memo notes, a U.S. official provided NSA with 200 phone numbers to 35 world leaders, despite the fact that the majority is probably available via open source. The intelligence production centers, that's a part of the NSA, have noted 45 previously unknown phone numbers. These numbers, plus several others, again, have been tasked. The document continues by saying the new phone numbers had helped the agency discover still more new contact details to add to their monitoring. The numbers have provided lead information to other numbers that have subsequently, again, been tasked. So, sure, the phone numbers they started monitoring, of course, led to other numbers of the people calling them, or the people were calling the cell phone, or the cell phone was calling them. And then the NSA could monitor these new numbers, as well as extend that web of surveillance out even further. The public accusation of spying on Merkel adds to the mounting political tensions in Europe about the scope of U.S. surveillance on the governments of its allies. After a cascade of backlashes and apologetic phone calls with leaders across the continent over the course of the week. Asked if the NSA had in the past tracked the German Chancellor's communications, Caitlin Hayden, the White House's National Security Council spokeswoman, said, quote, "The United States is not monitoring and will not monitor the communications of Chancellor Merkel. Beyond that, I'm not in a position to comment publicly on every specific alleged intelligence activity." At the White House Daily Briefing, Jay Carney refused to answer repeated questions about whether the U.S. had spied on Merkel's calls in the past. So yes, that means we've been listening to German Chancellor Angela Merkel's cell phone calls. The only reason the Obama administration doesn't outright lie is because they're afraid of what else Mr. Snowden has to release. If the administration says, oh, we've never listened in on her phone calls, and then Edward Snowden releases another memo showing they did, well, how much damage control has to be done now? This is why I state over and over that this country will never be able to thank Mr. Snowden enough for what he's doing. There are government disciples who curse his name, who say he's a traitor. These are the people looking to excuse government's actions no matter how bad. Now, this article continues with Merkel, who, according to Reuters, suspected the surveillance after finding her mobile phone number written on a U.S. document. And she's said to have called for U.S. surveillance to be placed on a new legal footing during a phone call to President Obama. This is supposedly what she said she told the president. The German federal government, as a close ally and partner of the U.S., expects in the future a clear contractual basis for the activities or the activity of the services and their cooperation. That's what supposedly she told the president. So there you go. I just pointed this out a minute ago. Merkel isn't so mad that spying is being done on Germany. It's just that she's been included in it. Right here is the proof in this statement. I'll read again. The German government expects in the future a clear contractual basis for the activity of the services and their cooperation. Notice she doesn't say, not a cessation of the spying, not an unconditional dismantling of the program. No, if the NSA is going to continue spying on German citizens, it needs to exclude their leaders. And, and by the way, let the German government get in on it as well. This is a government antagonizing their own populations. It doesn't just happen here in America. This is government out of control, and it's happening all around the world. Governments that don't see anything wrong with spying on their own citizens, watching where their money is spent, listening to who they're talking to, and reading their email. If you sit here and read a lot of these stories, you can almost feel the volatile nature of what's been happening around the world. I'm not saying anything is going to blow up here in this country or any other country, but you can tell the citizens are getting tired of this sort of thing. That's what we need to start addressing in our country. We have elections coming up next year, and if you don't run, you need to get someone who will run. Someone that you know who would be an excellent person to go to Washington and start making headway on getting all this rolled back. And more importantly, when they run, support them, get out there and get other people to vote for them. Let's get them to Washington and start reining in this out-of-control government. At least we can do something about it in our country. And if we can start reining in our government, maybe other people, citizens of their nations, will see this happening and decide, hey, we want some of that too. The half-hour break is already here this week, and wow, I've not gotten to a quarter of the stuff I brought in with me today. But when we come back after this break, we'll hit it hard and get through as much as we can here on the Patrick Riggin Show on the Libertarian Lighthouse Radio Network. Welcome back to the Patrick Riggin Show here on the Libertarian. This is what happens when you try to do three things at once. Here on the Lighthouse Libertarian Radio Network. Well, I could play that whole song, but I think it runs almost 4 minutes, and I'm sure I'd be getting a knock on the studio door way before then. Speaking of which, we're broadcasting from our home base here in Knoxville, Tennessee at News Talk 98.7 WOKI. When we go away on break, what I'm doing is I back off the volume in the headphones a little bit. So when you come back in, have to reach way over and turn that back up. Otherwise, you can't hear what you're saying in your head, and it sounds really weird. That's no excuse not to be professional, though. All right. This hour...
Patrick, man up.
Oh, yeah. We need to, pipe that stuff. Was that on the air, Jay, or was that just in my head?
Oh, no, it was on the air.
Okay.
I wouldn't waste an opportunity to lambast you behind the scenes.
Oh, okay. It was that snide remark when you, missed my music on the last out.
I have no idea what you're talking about. Lies perpetrated by the NSA.
Yes, and that's who it was. They're over here screwing around with my show.
It's like our very own episode of Homeland.
Yeah. Oh, I thought I heard a helicopter up on the roof earlier. And I thought it's a little too early for Santa. So
he doesn't go in the black ones.
Yeah. Oh, if he hangs around, I guess, was it Virginia up there where that headquarters is located, or out in Salt Lake City, he'll get questioned anyway.
All I'm saying is if Santa had a website, I'm sure it would work.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We'll just let that go. So, it certainly would work. I don't know, though. Santa, he's, not to run down this trail too much, but Santa's kind of in a commune up there. So there's not a lot of capitalism going on up there, Santa. So, what's the motivation? You could be looking at another USSR collapse. Oh, I ought to play that.
Are you saying that Santa is going to lead a coup on the United States?
Well, he does wear red. All right. Oh, boy. Let's try to get our listeners back now. All right. This hour, we've been talking a lot about these spying revelations and all this stuff being released by Edward Snowden. And every time something new comes out, I find myself getting a little irritated at people who are passing these stories around the internet. And not just about this spying, but any story that's done from an angle that isn't liberal. I get these conservatives and even people who believe in libertarian principles. A whole lot of them seem to seek this external validation that what they believe is correct. This positive reinforcement from other people, and mainly liberals and the media, that their personal principles are the correct ones to have. I hear it a lot when I talk to people. I read it on Facebook and in emails that we get. Someone will say, hey, look, Jon Stewart made fun of Obama on this, or CNN did an expose on this liberal story, or Saturday Night Live made fun of the administration. These things only have to happen one time, and it's all over the internet. Look, these liberals aren't going to change their minds and start marching towards more freedom and liberty. It just isn't going to happen. They don't believe that way. Their principles are rooted in government solutions to every problem. They're still fighting for the liberal side of these issues. They still want government in charge of everything. But whenever the mainstream media or prominent liberal makes a statement that could be taken as undercutting the liberal agenda or the Obama administration, this conservative side jumps all over it like some dog welcoming home its owner. It's like this is the hot guy or girl in high school, and they glance at you walking down the hall between classes, and all of a sudden now you're married. This person is so in love with you now. They finally seen past your thick glasses and braces to the wonderful person inside. And you knew this day would come. You knew eventually they'd get tired of dating that other hot, beautiful person and come around to seeing you for who you really are. We criticize our congressional representatives for doing this very thing when they get to Washington. They run on a bunch of campaign promises that sound so good, and they really understand your principles. They're so articulate and charismatic. This person is going to be one of the ones who turns around the government. But then when they get to Washington, all of a sudden they change. They start compromising on issues. They start listening to what the media is telling them. They start believing every poll that comes out. And here you sit back in your congressional district wondering, hey, what happened? It's the same thing you're experiencing when you swoon at the fact some liberal or some mainstream media outlet gives you the smallest morsel of a statement that could be considered as agreeing with your principles. Your representative is sitting up there in Washington wanting to be part of the cool kids, wanting to be invited to their cool parties. But they don't get that by fighting against government, because these so-called cool people agree with government. They like government. They want to see more of it. And if your representative is fighting against that, then they're the enemy. And a lot of people can't deal with that role in life, at least when it comes to people they secretly admire. These cool people are eating at the cool table in the lunchroom, but our government fighter is relegated to the nerd table, to the table where the untouchables sit, where all the uncool people have to eat their lunch. And a lot of people can't handle that. They might have already gone through it in high school and don't want to relive it, or they were part of the cool kids then and don't want to be left out now that they're in Washington. Either way, they want to be loved. They want to be part of the in crowd. They want to be mentioned in the society section of the newspaper. So what do? Well, the only thing they can do to get into the cool kids' good graces, vote like they're told. Vote for government programs, government solutions to everything. This is why I think it's so funny to see other conservatives and, yes, even libertarians who jump at the chance to show people, look, Jon Stewart agrees with me. Or MSNBC, boy, they really raked that senator over the coals last night. This external validation of your principles shouldn't be needed. If you've thought about them, you've tested them, and proved them to yourself over the years. If you know you're right, then who cares if some liberal agrees with you or not? This is one of the reasons I don't particularly care to have guests on this show. What are they going to say? Well, if they're on this show, it's probably going to be the exact same thing I'm saying, or have said. I don't need someone else telling me I'm correct. I know I am. That's not cockiness. That's confidence. Unfortunately, real confidence is so lacking in today's America that people often mistake it for cockiness. If you've thought about the principles you have, if you've tested them against other ideas, if you're sure you're correct on an issue, then don't be afraid to stand up for it. This is the problem in Washington. None of these politicians have the assurance of their principles to stand firm in the face of oppression. Or opposition, I guess, is the word I'm looking for. They'll all eventually fold. The media, the Washington establishment, their party leaders, all of these people wear down anyone who tries to stand on principle. And as I just mentioned, there's not a whole lot of people with that strong a character to stick to their guns in the heat of the battle. That's why you need to call them and reassure them, not just when you're mad at them, but when they're doing something good. Stay on them. Keep the fight going. Stay with where you're going. Because if you don't, you get what happens during the shutdown. You get Republicans who cave and decide, I can't stand the heat. We're up on the last break of the show this week. And coming up in the next segment, we'll change gears a little bit and we'll get to something I like to call morality in government. We'll hit that before we run out of time this hour when we come back here on the Patrick Riggin Show. And welcome back to the Patrick Riggin Show here on the Libertarian Lighthouse Radio Network and News Talk 98.7 WOKI. Playing some Shine Down a little while back. That song's called Enemies. Maybe playing off that last segment a little bit too well. What I want to talk about this segment real quick is our government here. Our government here in America, it's not supposed to be trying to impose moral standards on people. And it's also not supposed to be trying to fight terrorism overseas, but I'm not going to let myself get started with that. But our government is not supposed to be subsidizing people's medical care, their food, their housing, none of that. But in making the argument for a lot of these programs, we're told it's only fair, or that we're supposed to be a compassionate country, and this is what compassionate countries do. This is the outright imposition of moral standards on a supposedly free population. You may think it's fair to take money from one citizen and use it to pay another citizen's bills, but I don't. So if you use government to make me do it, then you're imposing your moral standards on me. That's what taking money from one American citizen and giving it to another in the form of charity is. It's an activity enforcing a moral standard. I can't say, well, I want my tax money to only be spent on repairing roads. Sorry, you don't get a choice. You pay the tax, or the nice government agents will show up at your door and take the money from you. If you don't have it right there, they'll take it out of your bank account or sell off your assets. Whether you agree with it or not, what they're doing, it doesn't matter. Whether it violates your rights or not, still doesn't matter. The government's not concerned. So if I think if it's immoral for one person to take part of someone else's salary, too bad. It doesn't matter because the government is enforcing this moral principle. It's determined that it's moral to take some of your money, so that's what it's going to do. Again, it doesn't matter whether you agree or not. But let's look at it from another angle. Let's say you're in a gay marriage and you move to a state that doesn't recognize it. Well, what do? You sue the state in court to recognize the legality of your union. It's happening right here in Tennessee. If someone says, hey, I don't think that's moral. I don't think gay marriage is the right thing to be doing. You'll be shouted down with, don't saddle me with your morality. Don't try to make me live by your morals. So as you see, if the government is enforcing a liberal moral, then that's fine. If it's honoring a conservative moral, then it's oppression and must be stopped. So what's the answer to all this? Simple. The government should not be enforcing any morals at all. Gay marriage, government shouldn't have anything to do with marriage, gay or otherwise. Government shouldn't care. Everyone should be taxed at an equal rate, whether you're married or not. Anything else is favoritism, and the government shouldn't be doing it. Welfare, government shouldn't be doing it. Taking money from one person to care for someone else is a moral question, and therefore government shouldn't be involved. That's our country's whole problem, too much government involvement. You can lay 99% of our country's problems at the feet of government intrusion. Look at the schools. People say the problem is we took religion out of the schools or that we need to spend more money. No, the problem is government involvement. If we didn't have government schools, we wouldn't have all the politics, all the political correctness. If you didn't like what a particular school was teaching your child, you could send them to one with which you did agree. Even an inexpensive basic private school could teach reading, writing, and arithmetic, and it wouldn't take 12 years to do it. Have you ever thought about that? 12 years of school, and all a lot of students have to show for it is a minimal amount of education. They can't do complex multiplication. They don't know algebra or even basic grammar. They can't spell. 12 years and they haven't learned what a third grader knows in a private school. That's ridiculous. All because we have a government screwing up yet another part of our society. More children increasingly born out of wedlock? Not really a moral problem, but still, it's a problem with government being involved in the charity business. If you're a girl and can't get monetary support for a child, then more than likely you aren't going to jump in bed with a guy who doesn't have a job or money. Is it being cruel? Doesn't matter. Government doesn't have the right to take money from one citizen and give it to another. Cruelness is a morality label, and our government shouldn't be legislating morality. Besides, is it not cruel to take money away from one parent to give to another? What about the first parent's rights to provide for their children? Is it okay to deprive one child of money and give it to another? That's what the government's doing. When money is taken from one tax-paying parent, it is in essence being taken from their child as well, is it not? That's less money available to be spent for that child because it's being given to another whose parent doesn't feel the need to support their child. Now, is that the right thing to do? Government should not be legislating morality. Government involvement is causing more problems, and you can see it happening every day. And as I stated on this show, around the world, we're seeing the problems. When we deviate away from these basic functions of government, we're getting into morality. We're forcing a moral standard on people who are supposed to be free to be immoral if they want, as long as they aren't infringing on the rights of another individual. Obamacare is the same thing. Obamacare is the enforcement of government-determined correct morals, in this case, medical care. We're up on the last of the show here. I've run out of time. If you want more information about us, you can hit our Facebook page, facebook.com/Patrick Riggins Show, facebook.com/Patrick Riggins Show. You don't have to be a member of Facebook. You can just type in that address, and you can read everything on the page. You can also get our archives at youtube.com/Patrick Riggins Show. And if you want to email us, again, easy, PatrickRigginsShow@gmail.com. Liberty begins with you. It's in your mind. Don't ever forget that. Join us next Saturday afternoon at 4, where we'll be fighting for freedom, liberty, and the restoration of the Constitution. Thanks for listening, and have a great week.
As a dreamer dreams and a
Join us again next week for a solid dose of truth on the Patrick Riggins Show. Be there.